and welcome to the lineup. Today is November the 4th, 2021. I'm Barry Stagner and wanted to share a couple of things before we jump in. A very important meeting going on out at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills this Friday night. You can stream it live from the church's website, which is Calvary CCH, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, calvarycch.org. And what Pastor Jack is doing out there is hosting a town hall meeting with two of the on the front lines attorneys who've been dealing with these vaccine mandates. And of course, we all know Joe Biden just basically made the vaccine mandate for companies with over 100 employees mandatory as of January 4th. And companies are not just recommended, but required to basically terminate employees who refuse to get the vaccine. And we'll talk some more about these types of things here throughout the program tonight. But Pastor Jack is going to host this event where these two frontline attorneys are going to discuss exactly where employees stand, as well as the issue as where students stand, should these mandates become in effect on the campuses, which that's in the works as well. So again, this Friday, Town Hall, calvarycch.org. Robert Tyler and attorney Brad Dacus will be the two attorneys discussing how the church is to handle these things. So also, we're going to do the program a little bit differently this week, and we're going to focus on, I think, what's on everybody's minds. And let me just say this. Somebody sent or made a comment online about how disrespectful it was for me to call the former president 45, because that's what the leftists used to call him. Listen, there are trolls out there listening to everything that is being said, and there are certain buzzwords like the former president's name that will flag a video and cause them to restrict it. And so just trying to keep on the air, so to speak. Everybody's been doing the same thing, Amir, and others have been very cautious about the verbiage that's used in order to make sure that we don't get flagged and taken off, but yet still communicate what it is that needs to be heard. And we're going to talk about what is on everybody's mind this week, and we'll discuss that as we go. It has been a busy week in the Middle East. We do know there were two strikes in and around Damascus this week, according to Syrian news agencies, reminding us Isaiah 17:1 is still hanging out there. Damascus is going to become a ruinous heap and uninhabitable city. This is a prophecy that has not been fulfilled. Some would like to say, well, actually, Sennacherib destroyed Damascus years ago, 7th century BC. But I think the way to refute that is there's a Damascus today. So it did not cease being a city. So Isaiah 17:1 has not been fulfilled. It's yet to be fulfilled. And so here we are seeing military engagement between Israel and Syrian troops and the Iranians, obviously being within the crosshairs of Israel because of their presence there on their northern border. Now, it is interesting that there are many Bible interpreters, prophecy interpreters, who believe that it is possible that the Isaiah 17:1 scenario is the catalyst for the Ezekiel war. And having a strike on Damascus, causing the whole city to become a ruinous heap, is what triggers the invasion of the forces from the north, many of whom already have a military presence on Israel's northern border. We also know this week that there's been some major tensions between Saudis and the Lebanese because of Hezbollah's presence there. And, obviously the support of the Iranians of Hezbollah, the Saudis and the Iranians being at odds with one another. And really, that's part of why we've seen so many of the Arab countries make overtures and establish diplomatic relations with Israel, is because of the shared animosity toward the Iranians and their aggression. And so interesting week in the news in the Middle East. Amir does a fabulous job of keeping us updated. I know most of you, or many of you, follow Behold Israel, and you're well up to date on what's happening through him on the Middle East. Now, let's start with some good news. We had some elections on Tuesday here in the United States. We do know that Virginia now has a Republican governor, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. So it's kind of a clean sweep. We do know there's a very close race in New Jersey for governor as well. and it was so close it had to wait till the next day to be called. And the interesting part about that is there are 1 million more Democrats registered in New Jersey than there are Republicans, and yet they couldn't call it on election night. They had to wait till the next day to count the votes. So I believe there's a recount in order. It's almost mandatory when something is that close. But it's also interesting that within New Jersey, there was also a swing towards it's a heavily Democratic state. There's also a swing in Newark to where the city council is now 10 Republicans, 0 Democrats. So this seems to bode well for the Republicans at the midterms next year. And, we'll see what happens. And hopefully we'll get some balance back in this country, which often happens when there's basically a party that is controlling all 3 houses of government. And there's usually a swing in the other direction. Hopefully that's the case where we can get back to some sanity here in this country at the midterms. Now, Zero Hedge reports that Minneapolis voters reject the Democrat proposal to replace the police department. And that, again, is some good news to start off with this week. And Minneapolis progressives were handed a defeat Tuesday night after voters rejected a proposal to replace the city's police department with a Department of Public Safety, citing an election call by the Associated Press that night. The proposed change would have fought crime with a, quote, comprehensive public health approach to the delivery of functions by the Department of Public Safety, end quote, the specifics of which would have been in the hands of the mayor and the city council. And according to supporters, the plan would have amended the city's charter to remove a requirement that the Minneapolis PD maintain a minimum number of officers whose role would be reduced in matters of the homeless, mental health issues, and substance abuse. However, they would still have been the first line of defense when it comes to violent crime. Or, the article says, they would have all been fired because the proposal is completely vague. And supporters of the measure, including the Yes for Minneapolis Coalition, which petitioned to put the item on the ballot, blame misinformation for its defeat. Boy, has that become a popular word of late. Fake news and misinformation and fact checkers and all these things we see going on. We've got an interesting story about what this is causing to happen within societies around the world in a few moments. If the people of Minneapolis vote no, that does mean that the disinformation campaign has won this battle, according to Janae Bates, who is the minister and spokesperson for the group. And yet she said, we will continue moving forward. And so their efforts to basically do away with the police department are going to continue. Now, I want to spend some time here because this is something that is crucially important. And this comes from a secular website. The website is actually called Waking Times. It's basically a health type of website, and it deals heavily with psychology and nutrition and things basically that can make life better. No mention of God or anything like that. Promotes evolution, all these other things. But their observations are of interest. And the headline of this article is Mass Psychosis is a Real Global Pandemic. Mass psychosis is defined as the epidemic of madness that occurs when a large portion of society loses touch with reality and descends into delusions. Something about strong delusions comes to mind from 1 Thessalonians or 2 Thessalonians 2. And the witch trials of the 16th and 17th centuries are a classic example. We're now in the middle of another mass psychosis induced by relentless fear-mongering coupled with data suppression and intimidation tactics of all kinds. A number of mental health experts have expressed concern over the blatant panic mongering during this pandemic, warning it can have serious psychiatric effects. For example, in a December 22nd, 2020 article in Evie magazine, S.G. Chea discussed the emergence of mass insanity caused by delusional fear brought on by the pandemic. Even when the statistics point to the extremely low fatality rate among children and young adults, measuring 0.2% at age 10 and 0.1% at age 25, the young and the healthy are still terrorized by the chokehold of irrational fear when faced with the pandemic. Instead of facing reality, the delusional person would rather live in their world of make believe. But in order to keep faking reality, they have to make sure that everyone else around them also pretends to live in their imaginary world. In simpler words, the delusional person rejects reality. And in this rejection of reality, others have to play along with how they view the world. Otherwise, the world won't make sense to them. It's why the delusional person will get angry when they face someone who doesn't conform to their worldviews. In December of 2020, psychiatrist and medical legal expert Dr. Mark McDonald also went on record stating the true public health crisis lies in the widespread fear which morphed and evolved into a form of mass delusional psychosis. We are now well beyond the first profound shocks of this crisis, and it's deeply concerning that the number of mental health referrals remains so high, according to Brian Dow, Deputy Chief Executive of Rethink Mental Illness. He went so far as to refer to the outside of his home or office as the outdoor insane asylum, where he must assume that any person I run into is insane unless they prove otherwise. And reports of psychotic episodes soar in Great Britain, the article says, after some 19 months of abnormal pandemic life, the data is starting to reflect McDonald's fears. For example, in the UK, psychiatric referrals for first-time psychotic episodes have skyrocketed, according to The Guardian on October 17, 2021's issue. Cases of psychosis have soared over the past 2 years in England as an increasing number of people experience hallucinations, delusional thinking amid the stresses of the pandemic. There was a 29% increase in the number of people referred to mental health services for their first suspected episode of psychosis between April of 2019 and April of 2021. Again, a 29% increase of first episode breakdowns or whatever it is are classified, delusional thinking and hallucination. Sorry. The charity Rethink Mental Illness is urging the government to invest more in early intervention for psychosis to prevent further deterioration in people's mental health, from which it could take them years to recover. It says the stats provide some of the first concrete evidence to indicate the significant levels of distress experienced across the population during the pandemic. And psychosis, the article says, takes a heavy toll on a person's life, according again to Rethink Mental Illness, Brian Dow. He commented, psychosis can have a devastating impact on people's lives. Swift access to treatment is vital to prevent further deterioration in people's mental health, which could take them years to recover from. And these soaring numbers of suspected first episodes of psychosis are cause for alarm. We are now well beyond the first profound shocks of this crisis, and it's deeply concerning that the number of referrals remains so high. As first presentations of psychosis typically occur in young adults, this steep rise raises additional concerns about the pressures the younger generation have faced during this pandemic. Now, I'm sure we've all seen stories. There was just one that popped yesterday about someone who actually had a position. I can't remember what their position was, but it had to do with the educational system, and where they said that they hope that the children or the parents who have not had their children vaccinated, they hope that their children get COVID and die. I mean, this is where all of this has led to, this delusional kind of hateful thinking. And the article goes on to talk about the 190,271 from 0 to 18-year-olds were referred to children and young people's mental health services between April and June. 190,271 between April and June of this year. That's a 134% increase again, these are Great Britain statistics of mental health services. 8,552 children and young people were referred to for urgent or emergency crisis care between April and June. That's up 80% from the same time period of last year. 340,694 children in contact with children and young people's mental health services at the end of June is up 25% from the same month of last year, and up 51% when you compare June of 2019 with 2020. Eating disorders are more prevalent than ever. And the rapid increases left many children waiting for months for treatment, delays that could have life-threatening consequences. Now, I wanted to spend some time on this to underscore the importance of what it is that we believe and how important it is that we get out there and tell people that there is a hope, that there is life beyond this one, and that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. There's sound thinking, and we don't have to sacrifice our thinking or fall into delusional thinking in this fear-mongering season of history that we live in, where misinformation and twisted information has been presented in many cases, and therefore we have a source of hope that the world desperately needs, especially now we see these incredible soaring numbers within the realm of our children, and more to come, I'm sure, and so many other reports on the impact of having to mask up on campus and all these other things are weighing heavily on society. And now the medical community is beginning to recognize there's a problem here, and we need to deal with it and back off of the fear mongering. And the article went on to say that the governments have a responsibility to monitor these types of things and not just shove them off at a corner and act like they're the price you have to pay to get everybody vaccinated. So another couple of interesting stories. We've been talking about the supply chain problems and all those other things going on. And I thought this particular article from Bloomberg was worth noting because we know that early in the tribulation period, famine will reach the degree that a quart of wheat, or basically enough grain to make a loaf of bread, is going to cost a day's pay. Now, Bloomberg's reporting this article, and their headline is what caught my eye. And it says, soaring wheat prices are raising bread costs. Wheat prices have surged from the U.S. to Russia, hitting a record in Europe and raising bread costs all over the world. And there may not be much relief soon. The crop, grown on more land than any other, was hit by droughts, frost, and heavy rain this year in key exporters. That's curbed supplies used in everything from pizza crust to French baguettes to Asian noodles and African couscous, pushing benchmark prices in Chicago to a 9-year high. That's not just threatening higher grocery bills, it's giving central banks a bigger inflation headache and risks worsening global hunger that's already at a multi-year high. The worry is that big crops looming in Argentina and Australia won't fully ease tight supply, and fields everywhere are only just now being planted. We could see further upside, said Carlos Mera, head of the Agricultural Commodities Research Center in Rabobank in London. The higher the price goes, the more fear there is in the market and the more panic buying. And boy, did we see that early on in the pandemic, where oddly the panic buying was in toilet paper and paper towels, which was totally weird. And it's kind of hit again. Our local Costco is limiting the purchase of paper towels to one per customer, paper towel packages, that is, to one per customer because the panic buying has started again. Wheat in Chicago traded lower on Tuesday after touching the highest since December of 2012, while Paris futures reached a record 297 euros a ton before closing at 292.75. And while the world has a lot of wheat, much of it that's held in countries like China, which ships little abroad. Inventories in the top 7 exporters, a better gauge of availability, are expected to shrink to an 8-year low. Argentina and Australia just started harvesting, but it'll take the better part of a year before the northern hemisphere silos are replenished with the next crop. And Russia, last season's top shipper, started taxing exports this year to safeguard supplies and keep domestic costs in check, and signaled an overseas sales quota is likely. So the very thing that's going to be in short supply during the tribulation period has now hit the news. And as I've been reminding you, and I will continue to remind you every week, as long as the Lord tarries, man, we're close. The Lord's coming for his church. And in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, we're going to be translated into the presence of the Lord in new glorified bodies. Isn't that good news today? The New York Times also reports how car shortages are putting the world's economy at risk. Turmoil in the auto industry, a powerful engine of the global economy, is threatening growth and sending tremors through companies and communities that depend on car makers for money and jobs. For every car or truck that does not roll off the assembly line in Detroit, Stuttgart, or Shanghai, jobs are in jeopardy. They may be miners digging ore for steel in Finland, workers molding tires in Thailand, or Volkswagen employees in Slovakia installing instrument panels in sport utility vehicles, but their livelihoods are at the mercy of the supply shortages and shipping chokeholds that are forcing factories to curtail production. The auto industry accounts for about 3% of the global economic output. And in car making countries like Germany, Mexico, Japan, or South Korea, or states like Michigan, the percentage is much higher. A slowdown in automaking can leave scars that take years to recover from. The shockwaves from the semiconductor crisis, which is forcing virtually all car makers to eliminate shifts or temporarily shut down assembly lines, could be strong enough to push some countries into a recession. In Japan, home of Toyota and Nissan, parts shortages caused exports to fall by 46% in September compared with a year earlier, a potent demonstration of the car industry's importance to the economy. It's a very meaningful drag on growth and employment, said Ian Shepherdson, chief economist of the Pantheon Macroeconomics. Car makers have been able to blunt some of the sting by raising prices, passing on some of the pain to car buyers. Ford and General Motors last week both reported big drops in sales and profits for the summer period, but raised their profit forecast for the full year. Daimler, the maker of Mercedes-Benz cars, said Friday that its net profit rose 20% in the third quarter, even though the company sold 25% fewer vehicles. Higher sticker prices more than compensated for the slowing production. Now, another interesting story coming from Zero Hedge, as we've had two talking about increasing prices and specifically the price of wheat, and therefore for a loaf of bread is on the rise. And Zero Hedge is reporting, and the headline is kind of a tell-all, in 2022, things aren't going to get done on an absolutely massive scale. Are we about to witness one of the greatest self-inflicted economic wounds in history? Mandate deadlines are starting to arrive. As we mentioned, Biden just stated that there is now, as of January 4th, going to be a 100-employee and larger mandate that all workers must be vaccinated. Large numbers of very qualified people are losing their jobs as a result of these mandates. And of course, this comes at a very bad time because they're already in the midst of the most epic worker shortage in U.S. history. Despite the biggest hiring push that I've ever seen in my entire lifetime, businesses all over America are still desperate for workers. The funny thing is that lots of available workers should theoretically be out there somewhere. And the number of Americans that are currently working is still about 5 million less than the peak that was just hit before the pandemic arrived. So where did all those missing workers go? That's a question we desperately need an answer to, because millions of workers seem to have evaporated from the system. And now that mandates are going to make things far worse, because millions of Americans that are actually good at their jobs are going to be ruthlessly terminated, and finding replacements for them is going to be exceedingly difficult. For instance, you just can't pull guys off the street and have them fly planes. Very soon, large numbers of pilots are going to be sent packing on a permanent basis. And for pilots for American Airlines, they gave us a taste of what's coming by engaging in a sick out over the weekend. American Airlines therefore canceled 634 flights on Sunday, more than 12% of its total operations for the day, the company said. The airline has now canceled more than 1,500 flights since Friday as it deals with weather issues and staffing shortages that started last week. And of course, American Airlines is trying to blame the weather for these canceled flights, but everyone knows what's really going on. Of course, global warming has to come into the picture there for the reason for these canceled flights. Now, the interesting thing, we're talking about the shortages in first responders as well, in articles such as this, where there was a deadline for municipal workers to get vaccinated in New York, and 26,000 have refused. 26% of the workers in New York City were still unvaccinated following the Friday deadline, and a significant jump in vaccinations occurred among city employees due to the deadline. But according to the AP, there are still 26,000 workers who have not uploaded proof of their vaccination status, and they face unpaid leave as a result. 26 fire companies in New York have had to completely shut down, as the FDNY reported. They shuttered 26 companies on Saturday due to staff shortages caused directly by the mandate, according to furious elected officials who ripped the move as unconscionable and warned it could have catastrophic consequences. So, will this cost lives? Of course it will. A 7-year-old boy just died in an apartment fire. And his grandmother was seriously injured because the FDNY could not respond because of staff shortages due to the mandate. We also are seeing that trash bags are spotted all over the place in Brooklyn. Some residents said it's been days since their trash has been picked up. A few said they realized something was off last week as one missed pickup happens, but they started to think there was a problem the second time. In many residential streets, the trash is now covering the entire sidewalk. One resident who's lived there for 40 years said she's never seen the area as dirty as it is right now. Also, we're getting a report from Fox News. Now, this is interesting in so many elements. We're going to talk in a few moments about Marxism, socialism, and its basic infiltration into American thinking. And this is part of it, because in countries that are socialist in nature or just simply tyrannical or communist, and they all have state-run media. And this article just grabbed my eye as soon as I read the headline. And it comes from Fox News. And the headline reads, Democrats ask reporters to do a better job selling Build Back Better, stating, we rely on all of you. Democrats ask reporters to do a better job selling President Biden's Build Back Better agenda, lamenting that press coverage is focused too heavily on the negotiation process instead of the substance of the plan. During a news conference Tuesday, members of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee were asked whether the party needed to change its messaging strategy so that the American public could understand what's actually in the two bills they hope to pass, the Build Back Better Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Representative Ted Lieu, a Democrat from California, who co-chairs the committee, responded it would be helpful if reporters could write more about what's in the bills. We were also in a really different information ecosystem than we were in even a decade ago, he said. You know, QAnon folks believe that JFK is going to magically reappear pretty soon. So that's the sort of thing we're dealing with. What a demeaning statement. And we do in part rely on all of you to convey the truth and actual facts. What a joke. He relies on the media to convey the truth and actual facts. And if all of you want to write about this amazing tax cut for families and children that's really transformative, that would be really helpful. And Representative Joe Neguse, a Democrat from Colorado, lamented that the media's focus on the process obfuscates away from the substance of the bills. And most of the coverage right now, in the better part of the last few months, has been on process, which of course makes sense because we are engaged in a complex legislative process to get these bills across the finish line. So, telling the media, we need you to sell this to the people, well, that's because the trust level in Congress is at an all-time and historic low here in the United States. Levels of trust are just beyond anything that I think we could have ever imagined happening here in the United States of America. Now, here's the story I mentioned a moment ago, and this comes from the Epoch Times. And the headline is interesting. We're going to spend a little bit of time here because this is important. Pastor, do champions of socialism realize that Karl Marx held a deep belief in God? Now, here's the interesting thing. That headline could get you to think that this is a good thing, this economic socialism that he has created. However, here's the interesting thing. Karl Marx, the father of scientific socialism, once wrote that he knew he was born to God, but God chose him for hell. Author and radio host Dr. David Jeremiah said that was one of the many aha moments he experienced in his year-long study of socialism, during which he read everything he could find on the ideology, including what motivated Marx in his ideological writings. People don't realize that Marx's socialist theories are all based on a fundamental belief in the existence of God, but a hatred and opposition to everything God has taught, Dr. Jeremiah said. Now, this is basically what the Calvinists report is that their purport that there are some on the day that they are born who have no chance of salvation. They are not among the elect, and this is what Marx believed. He believed that he was predestined for hell the day he was born, and therefore he didn't deny the existence of God, but he hated him and did everything to oppose him. And people don't realize, Jeremiah said, that Marxist socialist theories are all based on the fundamental belief in the existence of God, but a hatred and opposition to everything God has taught. Socialists don't believe that there is no God. They're not atheists, he told Epic TV. They're anti-God. In fact, Karl Marx was a cheerleader for the devil, he explained of his research, which he said has given him a new way of viewing trends in news and social policy that he believes can help Americans understand the social turmoil in the country right now. Just about every chapter in his book, in some way or another, goes back to things that I learned about socialism, said Jan Jelilik. And now, what is so amazing to me is that I've sensitized my mind and heart to all of this every day on the news. I see vivid examples of what's happening and how it is affecting us as a nation, she reported on Jeremiah's writing. The culture of canceling everything you don't agree with has bred the roots of totalitarianism in American society, Dr. Jeremiah warned, and he listed various negative trends, like parents being told they shouldn't have any say over the content taught in schools, Republicans and Democrats not being able to agree to disagree, and Christians being fired from their workplaces for sharing their faith as examples of how Marxist socialist ideas are eroding unity among people. There's nothing that is really true that should be afraid of challenge, Jeremiah said. If it's true, it's true. It shouldn't be an issue for it to be challenged because truth will win no matter what the challenge is. But if it's not true, then you can. So all the stuff that's going on right now is interesting to me in light of that discussion because most of it is lies. In his book, Dr. Jeremiah describes socialism as a deadly virus that is quietly spreading through our nation, far more lethal than the current pandemic. But he warned most Americans are totally unaware of the threat that it poses to our way of life. Now, I've said this before, I've said it multiple times at church, and it's raised eyebrows on some occasions and in other private conversations. But listen, socialism is a sin. It's not just an economic system, it's a sin. Because the fact is, it replaces God with human government, and it causes people to trust in the government in the ways that God said you have to trust in Him. He said through Jesus, Jesus being God in human flesh, said, you know what, don't worry about what it is you'll eat, drink, and wear, for your Father knows that you have need of all these things, your Father in heaven. And yet socialism says, no, you need to look to the government for what you eat, drink, and wear. They will take care of you. And so it's a blatant effort to replace and eliminate the need for God. Now, our next article is interesting in light of all that we're seeing going on in our culture today, and it comes from Zarazem, a Russian paper, and it's curious who the source of this article is, and it's none other than Vladimir Putin, who blasts pushing transgenderism on children as simply monstrous in his critique of Western wokeism. Russian President Vladimir Putin issued some typically frank and devastating comments on woke culture, afflicting the West and particularly the United States, in particular going after emerging norms on gender discussions, race relations, as well as cancel culture. Last week, Putin said woke cancel culture in West is reminiscent of the former Soviet repression. His wide-ranging assessment was given during the annual Valdai Discussion Club event held in the Black Sea in the city of Sochi on Thursday during a Q&A interaction with the audience. As previously described, some of the harshest words were in condemnation of NATO's attempts to expand its military infrastructure and presence in Ukraine, which he said is already underway and poses a real threat. But later, he additionally called out the cultural threat to traditional Russian values posed by the modern West. Some of his most interesting commentary in this area focused on transgenderism and so-called gender fluidity pushed by the left, and accompanying cancellation of any public figure who dares to speak out against it. Those who risk saying that men and women still exist and that this is a biological fact are virtually ostracized in the U.S. and the West in general, Putin said. And he likened what's going on to total phantasmagoria, or a dreamlike fantasy, according to a translation of his words featured in Russian media. Think about what we read earlier about these psychiatrists and those in the mental health fields who talked about the delusion that this is creating and how much we've seen advanced in recent days as we've watched this digression that's recorded actually in Romans 1 take place, and that strong delusion that's going to cause society as a whole to believe the lie of the Antichrist during the tribulation is in full swing today. And it's hard to believe some of the things that are taught as fact, and some of the things that you can be ostracized for, like thinking that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, which is biologically sound and scientifically sound. And yet, here you've got the very community, and this is one of the things I find to be most interesting. You've got the very community who's endorsing the fact that if you say you're a woman, but you're biologically and genetically a man, then you should be recognized as a woman. And these are the ones that are telling us in the midst of this pandemic, trust the science. Well, the science says a man's a man and a woman is a woman, and so does God. And yet they're telling us, who are promoting such ridiculous, unbelievable, unscientific things, that we need to trust them. How bizarre the age that we are living in. Now, here's an interesting story, and let me just preface it by saying there are rumblings that the Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, is going to take a second look at the Texas law. And sadly, it appears as though there are some recent appointees who are waffling on their position. And Christian Headlines reports it's saving lives. Abortions dropped 50% in Texas following the heartbeat law, a new survey shows. A new Texas law that prohibits abortions if a fetal heartbeat is detected has led to a 50% decline in abortions in the state, according to a new University of Texas study. Research at the University of Texas Policy Evaluation Project studied data from state clinics and found that abortions in September, the first full month the law was in effect, plummeted 49.8% compared to the same month 1 year earlier. The U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments Monday in an emergency appeal from abortion clinics and the Biden administration, each of which is asking justices to block the law. It is not known when the court will rule. The law requires abortion doctors to test for a fetal heartbeat. If one is detected, which typically occurs around 6 weeks of a pregnancy, then abortion is banned except in cases of medical emergency. Isn't it just amazing to think that there are people who are wanting to defend this heinous act, and there are people in places of power, including the highest office in the land, some say the most powerful position on the planet, who are sending people to the Supreme Court to fight against protecting human life inside the womb of a mother. Are we in a delusional time? No question about it. Along the same lines, our next article again comes from the Epoch Times, and the headline reads, researchers call for a halt on vaccines for pregnant women after a reanalysis of a CDC study. Two researchers say countries should halt the administration of vaccines to pregnant and breastfeeding women after reanalyzing a study performed by CDC researchers. The study in question, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in April, has been used by the CDC and health agencies in other countries to justify vaccination recommendations to pregnant women and new mothers. A U.S. study of over 35,000 women who were pregnant and had the mRNA vaccine showed that the side effects following the vaccination were very similar to those who were pregnant when compared to those who were not, the Australian government says in a guide to vaccination for women. The study, though, was corrected last month after concerns were raised by a researcher in Belgium. The CDC scientists acknowledged they should have made clear that they could not accurately calculate a risk estimate for miscarriages because the follow-up data was not yet available for most of the women. Did you catch that? They had no data, but they printed the report and circulated the report anyway. The correction resolves some of the issues, but there are still more, according to Dr. Simon Thornley, a senior lecturer in the University of Auckland section of epidemiology and biostatistics, and Dr. Alicia Brock, another researcher in New Zealand. The article's conclusions haven't changed substantially, as we believe is warranted from our reanalysis of the association related to early exposure to the vaccine in pregnancy, which indicates a substantially increased risk from background. After they reanalyzed the data, they found that there were, of the 827 pregnancies reported through the VSafe registry, 712 resulted in a live birth, nearly all of them women vaccinated in the third trimester. Of the other pregnancies, 104 resulted in miscarriage. Most of those occurred before 13 weeks of gestation. And the fact is that they had not included this data in their circulated information that was sent to other countries. And thankfully, these researchers have found it. So again, the fingers coming from the Democratic Party about misinformation being presented and what a bunch of weirdos the conservatives are, as they pointed. They're waiting for Kennedy to appear again and things of that nature. And yet here they are twisting the evidence to their own ends, the end justifying the means in their minds. Now, this is paired with another article from the Epoch Times that reads, CDC changed the definition of vaccine in order to accommodate some of those being put on the market. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention altered the definition of vaccine because of concern that its definition did not apply to certain vaccines, according to newly released internal emails. The agency updated its definition on September 1st. The definition was formerly a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease. The definition now reads, a preparation that is used to stimulate the body's immune response against diseases. Just very genetic. It doesn't have to be anything that targets anything specific. It just stimulates the body's immune response against diseases. Now, one CDC employee in August, shortly before the definition was changed, said that the definition was being used by right-wing pandemic deniers to argue that mRNA vaccines are not vaccines, according to the newly published emails. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines utilize messenger RNA technology. All three COVID-19 vaccines authorized for the use in the U.S. have plummeted in effectiveness against infection in recent months after initially being promoted as protecting against infection and severe disease. USA Today reports doctors must be honest with parents about unknown risks of emergency vaccine, the approved usage of the emergency vaccine. The FDA, a momentous announcement last week that Pfizer BioNTech vaccine will be authorized under the emergency use for children 5 to 11, was followed Tuesday afternoon by the CDC decision to recommend vaccines used for children. For some parents, this is blissful news. For others, the announcement raises questions and concerns. Of course, when it comes to children in America, we all want what is absolutely best for their health. Can you believe that? Here they are fighting to kill children in the womb, and yet here they are saying we all want what's best for children's health. We want to minimize the harms and suffering of children, as well as harms to those who love and care for them. We want to do what is best for the kids in the short term, as well as what is best in the long term. With that in mind, it is absolutely essential that we communicate about this vaccine in an informative and nuanced way. And for the moment, resist uninformative persuasion. This means we should use language that empowers parents to take part in a shared decision-making discussion to determine whether vaccination is right for their kid in this moment, or if not now, potentially some moment in the future. It is vital that medical practitioners don't exaggerate or embellish what is known in this moment. Applying pressure or force is not appropriate at this time. Trying to convince someone should take a back seat to trying to inform them and accepting their decision. A review of the evidence to date helps explain why. The CDC's flip-flopping doesn't inspire confidence. If you're pregnant, you deserve more information on vaccine safety. Emergency use authorization was granted in this age group on the basis of a pivotal trial that is ongoing but has a relatively small sample size, 4,700 children. This sample size is too small to document new or known adverse side effects called safety signals that have been noted at other ages and at other doses. For instance, myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that can reduce the heart's ability to pump or beat correctly, occurs in about 1 per 5,000 cases of vaccinated boys 12 to 15. If myocarditis occurs in boys aged 5 to 11 at the same rate as boys 12 to 15, a study this size would not be able to document that. So we're flying blind on side effect that parents need to be informed about. And finally, the trial was not designated or able to assess whether vaccinating kids of this age at this dose slows asymptomatic disease or spread to other household members or for adults who care for these kids outside of the home. That limitation must be acknowledged. So this, again, is a group of doctors who are saying, and Dr. Stephan Baral, associate professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, is one of the doctors that's quoted here. And he went on to say there are enough parents knocking down the doors to get their children vaccinated that the rest of us parents, scientists or otherwise, can take a breather and see how it goes and then decide accordingly. In other words, people that want to get it, let them get it. People that don't. But there's still not enough research information to say that this is something that's not going to have the same side effects in other age groups. So again, just remember this Friday night, log on to calvarycch.org, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Pastor Jack Hibbs, attorneys attorneys Brad Dacus and attorney Robert Tyler will be there at a town hall telling and informing us about our rights here in the United States, at least. Fox News says Senate Republicans to formally disapprove and nullify the mandate on private employees, that which we mentioned a moment ago. And OSHA is expected to release a formal rule on the mandate in coming days. We know this article was from yesterday, and that now happened today. And more than 36 Senate Republicans are moving to formally disprove and nullify the mandate on private employers under the Congressional Review Act, the official process for Congress to eliminate an executive branch rule. Senator Mike Braun of Indiana is leading 42 Republican senators on Wednesday to strike down Biden's rule, which mandates employees of private businesses with 100 workers or more to receive the vaccine. Republicans blasted the mandate, which Biden introduced in September, and the forthcoming formal rule from OSHA, which is expected to be released in coming days again. It has now been released. So hopefully there will be some who step up in the legislative branch and stand against this executive order that violates the constitutional rights of all Americans, but especially parents, to make their personal decisions regarding their own health and the health of their children. And again, for employers to make a determination about somebody's own personal health decision is, again, a violation of the labor laws. And it just cannot be done. And especially when we're seeing the numbers that we're seeing of the impact of the mental health issues and this delusional season that we're in, and the impact it's having on adults as well as kids. This would be further exacerbated by people, again, losing their job because, the whole basic idea that you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelet that is used with this, again, pandemic that has a less than 2% fatality rate. And it's obviously uh, spread around the world, and the numbers are discouraging. There's no question about that. Who wants to see millions of people lose their life to something, that's sweeping the globe as this is? Of course, everybody wants to stand against it, but again, forcing something on that hasn't been properly tested, on citizenry that hasn't been properly tested, that's a dangerous thing to do, and it's a violation of our rights. So again, tune in Friday night, 7 p.m. Pacific time, here on the West Coast of the United States, calvarycch.org, for a town hall meeting regarding employee and parental rights regarding this issue. So we covered some things today that we wanted to talk about because it's on everybody's mind. And these are the realities that are going on in our world today. And I just want to point you back again to the fact that we are not a people who live without hope. And as Paul told the church at Thessaloniki, yes, we sorrow, and we sorrow about the loss of our loved ones, but we don't sorrow without hope. And we are not a hopeless people. We have the hope of heaven. We need to be sure that we're communicating that hope with people around us, because as the reports have stated, and now you think about what's going on here, we've got this issue that's got everybody worried, and some people are just flat freaking out about getting this, and are they going to die from it? And again, the stats to them don't matter. If it's less than 2%, am I going to be one of those 2%? And they just are panic stricken about getting this. And I think we've all encountered people. We've seen people driving by themselves in their car with a mask on, and other, we've seen all kinds of people in the grocery store with wetsuits and breathers and rebreathers and all kinds of things we've seen, because people are absolutely terrified of that. And now you add to that losing your job, or your company shutting down, or the prices of daily necessities going through the roof, or the inability to purchase a car, or it's not just the fact that maybe you got the jab and you're able to go to work. Maybe you can't go to work because there's nothing to work on. So this is just spiraling out of control, and we do know that's exactly what's going to happen during the tribulation. It's going to reach a point where under the second horseman of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, people are going to murder one another. The word used there is actually the word for butcher, and people, because of starvation, the price of food, hatred, all the other things. The second horseman is not talking about global war. It's talking about individual people killing one another. And now we're just seeing kind of the precursors to all that happen right before our eyes. But we also have to remember as believers that these things are indications that our redemption is nigh. Jesus is coming for us. And that's a promise that we have to keep in mind through all these things and at all times. And I want to encourage you again, because we are the ones who have actual hope in the midst of times such as these. So we need to be proactive. And we've been talking at the church and been praying that we would have an Acts 4:31 experience where God would shake us to the degree that we speak the word of God with boldness. And that's what we need to be doing in these last days. And yes, there is good news in the midst of all this bad news and difficult news. God is still on the throne. Jesus' blood is still sufficient to cover all sins. He's coming for us, and in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, we're going to be taken out of here. And, I think it's important to remember, there's people that say, well, I don't want the Lord to come back. There's too many people who are going to perish right now. Well, if he comes in 10 years, it's going to be true on that day too. If he comes in 20 years, it's going to be true on that day too. If he comes in 100 years, it's going to be true then too. So that's why there's an appointed day and hour that the Lord preset, I believe, before the foundations of the world, because the whole plan was put in place before the world was even formed. That includes the plan to come get the church, snatch us off the surface of the earth, take us to forever be with him. That is a preset day and hour. So we don't just live with the imminency of the rapture in mind, in the hopeful status of, yeah, we're going to get out of here someday. Maybe it's today. but also we need to use it not just to uh, continue that hope of the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, but also as motivation that we're running out of time. Things are moving and advancing, not just in the Middle East, but now we're starting to see talk about wheat prices, talk about the loss of jobs because of the peripheral issues created by this pandemic. The short supply of the things necessary to build a car going to cost people their jobs. The inability to get product to market. You ship grain to another country. What if it sits off the coast on a barge for weeks and goes rancid? Or who knows all the things that are coming. But we do know that we are the people of hope. We are the ones with the truth because we know the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. So be bold and confident in these last days and the message that God has given us. And one last reminder, if you're one who joins us online for our Sunday services, this Sunday, which by the way is the time change, we get an extra hour of sleep and fall back on our new service times at Calvary Chapel Tustin. If you care to watch us on cctustin.org or via Facebook on my personal page, my public figure page rather, our new service times are 7:45, 9:30, and 11:30. And if you don't have any of the social media platforms, you can watch on YouTube after it's uploaded, usually the next day. So anyway, God is good. He's coming for his church. We have much to be thankful for, even in the midst of all we see going on around us today. So with that said, I had somebody comment, we used to say what you closed the program with back in the 70s. Well, that's where I got it from. It was from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, where it was often said between believers, we'll see you here, there, or in the air. That's it for this week. God bless you, and should the Lord tarry, we'll see you